Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're gonna dive into tort law,
Ooh.
specifically negligence defenses.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of tort law?
I have heard of tort law.
So tort law is basically it's a system that deals with civil wrongs, right? Like think slip and falls, car accidents,
Right.
defamation, all of that stuff, providing remedies for those who have suffered harm due to someone else's actions.
Yeah, so it's essentially a way of righting a wrong, right? So if somebody's done something wrong to you, tort law can help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going to be focusing on negligence defenses.
Yeah.
So negligence is, I mean, you're the expert here,
But
but
negligence is a key area
it's an important part of tort law.
within tort law, yeah.
Can you explain that to our listeners a little bit?
Yeah, so, I mean, in essence, negligence is when somebody breaches a duty of care that they owe to another person, and that breach causes damage or harm to that other person.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit.
Yeah.
When we're talking about legal cases, we often hear terms like claimant and defendant.
Yes.
Can you clarify what those mean for our listener?
Yeah, absolutely. So the claimant is the person who is bringing the claim. They're the ones that are saying that they have been wronged. And the defendant is the person that the claim is being brought against.
Okay, got it.
So they're the one that's allegedly.
Yeah, so in a negligence scenario, the claimant would be the person who was injured, and the defendant would be the person who allegedly caused that injury.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So going back to our cafe example, the person who slipped on the coffee would be the claimant,
Right.
and the cafe owner, who didn't clean up the spill, would be the defendant.
Got it. Okay, so now things get a little tricky.
Yeah.
You're telling me there are times when someone could be negligent but not fully liable for the harm caused.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. That's where these defenses come in.
Okay.
So there are situations where the defendant can argue that they shouldn't be held fully responsible.
And there are three main ones that we're going to be looking at today. Contributory negligence,
Okay.
Volenti, non-fit injuria.
Volenti.
Volenti, that's the Latin phrase.
Yeah.
And then illegality, which is sometimes also called ex turpi causa.
Okay, so we got Latin phrases,
Yeah.
getting fancy.
Bit of Latin always makes things more interesting.
So tell me, what's the big idea behind contributory negligence?
So contributory negligence is basically saying that the person who's injured, so the claimant, might have also acted negligently.
Okay.
And so they've actually contributed to the harm that they suffered.
So if I'm walking down the street and I'm looking at my phone and I get hit by a cyclist who's also not paying attention, whose fault is it?
It's a bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the cyclist should be looking where they're going,
Right.
but you're also not paying attention as a pedestrian.
Right.
And so you've put yourself at risk as well.
So does that mean I can't sue the cyclist at all?
So that's a really good question. And this is where the law kind of had to grapple with that a little bit.
Right.
So the law says that it doesn't completely bar the claim. It's not saying you can't claim at all.
Okay.
It's just reducing the damages
Okay.
based on how much you've contributed to the incident.
Okay.
And this was clarified.
So how do they determine like how much each person is responsible?
Yeah. So courts have to look at the facts of the case. They try and work out, what percentage of blame should be attached to each party.
Right.
And there was a really important act that was passed in 1945, the Law Reform Act.
Okay.
And this really clarified that.
Oh, so before 1945 you couldn't sue.
Well, the law was a little bit more difficult.
Here.
It wasn't as clear, yeah.
Okay.
So that act kind of came in and said, no, we need to apportion blame in these situations. It wouldn't be fair to completely bar someone's claim just because they were a little bit careless.
That makes sense.
So it's about being fair and just...
So let's say I'm 20% responsible.
Yeah.
They're 80% responsible. My damages are reduced by 20%.
Exactly.
Okay.
Got it.
And the courts use this phrase, just and equitable,
Okay.
when they're making these decisions. So they're trying to find a solution that's, fair to both sides.
Got it. Okay. So do you have any real-life examples that can help illustrate contributory negligence?
Yeah, loads. One that springs to mind is Jones v. Lavox Quarries. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
Jones v. Livox Quarries. I feel like I've heard of that.
Yeah, so this involved a guy who, during his break at work, he decided to hop onto the back of a track excavator.
A what?
A track excavator.
Okay.
It's like a big, like a digger,
Like construction equipment?
Construction, yeah. Big
Yeah.
piece of construction equipment.
Okay.
And unfortunately, another vehicle crashed into it and he was injured.
Oh.
And so he tried to sue for his injuries, but the court said, well, hang on a minute.
You chose to ride on the back of this machine.
Yeah.
You put yourself in a dangerous position,
Yeah.
and therefore we're going to reduce your damages because of that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So even though it wasn't completely his fault, the accident happened,
Right.
he contributed to his injuries.
So he was partially to blame for the harm that he suffered.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a good example.
Yeah. It kind of brings it to life a bit more, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Are there any other examples you can think of?
Loads. So actually, even before it was law to wear seatbelts in cars, there was this really important case, Froom v. Butcher, I think it was.
Okay.
And that established this principle that if you're injured in a car accident and you weren't wearing a seatbelt,
Right.
then you could be held partly responsible.
Oh,
I mean,
even if the other driver was completely at fault.
yeah, I know. It sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it?
So that would affect how much money you could get.
Yeah, so it could reduce the amount of damages that you could receive.
Wow. Okay, so what if someone just completely refuses to wear a seatbelt?
Well, I mean, nowadays it's against the law, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
You have to wear a seatbelt.
you have to wear a seatbelt. But even back then, they said, look, it's common sense. It's a sensible precaution.
Right.
You can reduce the risk of harm significantly by just wearing a seatbelt.
I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah. And the court actually had formulas
What?
for different scenarios.
Really?
Yeah, like if wearing a seatbelt could have prevented all your injuries, then your damages would be reduced by 25%.
Oh, wow.
If some injuries were unavoidable, then it would be 15%.
So they had a whole system.
Yeah, they really had it all figured out.
Okay, that's fascinating. But I mean, I can see how some people might find that controversial, right? Like, shouldn't
Yeah.
people have the freedom to choose
Yeah, of course.
whether or not to wear a seatbelt?
I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about that balance between personal freedom and then safety regulations.
Yeah.
But I think the court's point was that even though it wasn't the law at the time,
Right.
it was still something that it was a sensible precaution to take
Yeah.
and could have prevented a lot of the harm.
Okay. So it makes you think twice about, taking unnecessary risks, even if someone else is being careless.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that the court aims to be just and equitable when making these decisions. How does that work when the injured person is a child?
That's a really good point. Yeah, you can't hold a child to the same standard as an adult.
Yeah.
So there's a case that addresses this.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, and it's actually quite a sad one. Jackson v. Murray.
Okay.
And this involved a 13-year-old girl
Oh.
who was hit by a speeding car.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she'd just gotten off a school bus.
Oh.
And it was dusk.
Okay.
And it was a 60-mile-an-hour road with no streetlights.
Gosh, that's a recipe for disaster.
It is.
Poor girl.
Yeah, so the court had to really think about
Yeah.
how do we assess contributory negligence in this situation?
Right, because a 13-year-old is not going to be thinking the
Yeah.
same way as a...
As a 30-year-old, are they?
Right, exactly.
And they don't have the same
Yeah.
level of
Judgment.
judgment and understanding of risk.
Right, yeah.
So what they decided was, we have to take the child's age into account.
Okay.
We can't hold them to the standard of a reasonable adult.
Right.
We have to hold them to the standard of a reasonable child of that age.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. And so they did find her partially responsible, or
They did, yeah.
They did.
But it was a lower percentage
Yeah.
than if it had been an adult.
Right.
So they acknowledged that, children will be children.
Yeah.
And they don't always make the best decisions.
Yeah, they don't think things through always.
No.
Okay, that's interesting. So how do courts deal with like changing standards? Because what might be considered reasonable care today
Yeah.
might have been different 50 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've already seen that with the seatbelt example.
Right.
And so courts have to constantly be looking at current laws, technological advancements, are there new safety features that people are using?
Yeah.
Even social attitudes towards risk.
Right.
What's considered acceptable
Yeah.
has definitely changed over time.
Okay, so it's an ongoing challenge to stay current and make sure those judgments are consistent.
It is. Yeah, it keeps the courts on their toes.
So that was contributory negligence. Now let's move on to the Latin phrase.
Okay.
Volenti non fit injuria.
Volenti. Yes, that's the one.
This one sounds intimidating.
It does sound a bit scary, doesn't it?
Yeah. Can you break it down for our listener?
Yeah, so basically it means to a willing person, injury is not done.
Okay.
So if you're knowingly and voluntarily putting yourself at risk,
Mm.
then you can't really sue someone if you get hurt.
Okay, so like if I go skydiving
Yeah.
and I get injured,
Mm-hmm.
I can't sue the skydiving company because,
Right, because you knew there was a risk involved.
yeah, that's an inherent risk.
Exactly.
Okay.
But of course, like with everything in law, there are nuances.
Right.
So there are a couple of key elements here. One, did the claimant actually fully understand the risk?
Okay.
And two, did they genuinely choose to accept that risk?
So let's take passengers in cars.
Yeah.
Do I consent to the risk just by getting in the car?
Well, that's a good question.
What if I know the driver's been drinking?
Yeah, I mean, that's a completely different situation, isn't it?
Right.
And there's a case that actually dealt with that, Morris v. Murray.
Okay.
And so a passenger went on a flight.
On a flight. Okay.
Yeah, with a pilot that he knew had been drinking very, very heavily.
Oh, no.
And as you can imagine, the plane crashed, and the passenger sadly died. And his estate sued the pilot's estate. But the court actually said no. Volenti applies here.
Really?
Because he knew that the pilot was drunk,
Yeah.
and he willingly took that risk.
Oh, wow.
So
That's a tough one.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
That makes you think.
It does.
Okay. So what about learning to drive? If I'm learning to drive and I'm with an instructor, does the instructor just like accept all the risks?
Well, there's another case that deals with that.
Is there really for everything?
Yeah. It's called Nettleship v. Weston.
Okay.
And in that case, the learner driver crashed, injuring the instructor.
Okay.
And the instructor decided to sue. And what was really interesting about this case is that the court said that the learner driver, even though they were inexperienced,
Yeah.
they were still held to the standard of a reasonable driver.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the instructor, by agreeing to teach them to drive,
Yeah.
hadn't accepted the risk that they would be injured by.
Right. Or lack of skills.
Yeah, their incompetence, essentially.
Wow. Okay. So it goes back to that knowledge
It does.
and the acceptance of that risk.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
not just like a blanket acceptance of everything.
Yeah, you have to be very specific about what risks you're actually accepting.
Okay. So are there any limits on how this defense can be used?
Yeah, there are some limits. So, for example, the Road Traffic Act, 1988, actually restricts
Okay.
the use of volenti
Oh.
in road traffic accidents.
So if I cause an accident, I can't just say, well, you got in the car.
Exactly. You can't just use it as a blanket defense.
You know the risk.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's about protecting, vulnerable passengers.
Right.
And making sure that drivers are held accountable.
Okay. So what about in sports? Like if I'm playing rugby or football and I get injured, can I sue the other player?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. There was a case, Condon v. Basie,
Okay.
and this involved a football player who suffered a broken leg
Oh, no.
from a really reckless tackle. And the court basically said, look, obviously when you participate in sports,
Right.
you're accepting some level of risk, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the game.
Right.
But there's a limit.
Okay.
You can't just go around breaking the rules
Right.
and causing really serious harm.
So if it's a normal part of the game,
Mhm.
you can't sue.
Right.
But if someone like intentionally
Yeah.
hurts you,
Yeah, if they go beyond what's considered acceptable within the rules,
they can be held liable.
then you can sue. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So it's about drawing that line between what's a foreseeable risk in the game
Yeah.
and what's just, negligence or recklessness.
Okay. What about rescuers? If I see someone in danger and I get hurt trying to save them,
Yeah.
can I sue the person who created that dangerous situation?
That's a great question. And that was actually addressed in a case called Haynes v. Harwood and Son.
Okay.
So this involved a police officer who was injured trying to stop runaway horses.
Runaway horse. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. And so he sued
He sued.
the owner of the horses
Okay.
because they had left the horses unattended.
Right.
And so the court said, well, actually, Volenti doesn't apply here
Really?
because he was acting to try and rescue people from this dangerous situation.
Oh, okay.
So the court recognized
Yeah.
the importance of helping others.
Right.
And they weren't going to penalize him for taking a risk
To save others.
to save others. Yeah.
Okay, so they were putting the value of human life above.
Yeah. And this is a principle that's kind of been upheld in subsequent cases
Oh,
involving rescuers as well.
so it's not just a one-off thing.
No, no. Generally, courts are hesitant to apply Volenti when someone is injured while trying to do something heroic.
Right.
And trying to save someone from a situation that wasn't their fault.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think we've covered a lot of ground with Volenti.
We have.
It's amazing how one little legal principle can have such
Yeah.
wide-ranging effects.
Far-reaching consequences, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about how someone might be partially responsible for their own injuries.
Yeah.
We've talked about how knowingly taking a risk can affect a negligence claim.
Yeah.
But what happens if someone gets hurt while they're breaking the law?
Ah, okay.
That's where illegality comes in, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so tell me about that.
So this is sometimes called ex turpi causa.
Ex turpi causa.
It's another Latin phrase.
Where's Latin?
I know. So essentially what this means is you can't sue for damages
Okay.
if you were injured while you were committing a crime.
Okay, so let's say I'm running away after shoplifting.
All right.
And I trip and fall on someone's property and break my ankle.
Okay.
It sounds like they might have been negligent in not fixing whatever I tripped over.
Yeah.
But can I actually sue them?
So that's a really good question, and it's a classic example of where the illegality defense would likely come into play.
Okay.
So even if the property owner was negligent,
Yeah.
the fact that you were committing a crime at the time
Right.
would probably prevent you from being able to claim.
So it's not about letting them off the hook.
No, it's not about that.
It's about
making
the
sure.
legal system's not used to reward someone.
Exactly. You can't profit from your own wrongdoing.
Right.
That's the kind of the principle.
Yeah, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Exactly.
You can't break the law.
Yep.
And then expect it to protect you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a matter of public policy.
Yep.
The courts have said this would be really unfair
Yeah.
and inconsistent.
So are there any famous cases that can...
Oh, there are tons. One of the big ones is Gravy Thames Trains.
Okay.
So in that case, there was a passenger on a train
Mm-hmm.
that was involved in a really, really bad crash.
Oh.
And he developed PTSD as a result.
Okay.
And then later, sadly, he killed somebody,
Oh, my goodness.
and he was convicted of manslaughter.
Okay.
And then he sued the train company.
He sued the train company.
Yeah.
Wow.
Saying that it was their negligence
Yeah.
that had caused the PTSD that led to him
Oh, wow.
killing
Oh,
someone.
no. So what happened?
So this case went all the way to the House of Lords,
Okay.
which is the highest court
In the UK.
in the UK. Yeah.
Okay.
And they said no.
They said no.
They said no. It would be completely inconsistent
Right.
and against public policy to imprison someone for a crime
Right.
and then to compensate them for the consequences of that crime.
Right, because you're essentially rewarding them
Yeah,
for doing something wrong.
exactly.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter.
So his mental state
Yeah.
wasn't enough to
It-
overcome that principle.
No, it's about upholding this fundamental principle
Yeah.
that you can't profit from your own wrongdoing.
Okay. Wow.
Okay.
Okay. What other cases?
So there's another really important case, Henderson v. Dorset Healthcare.
Dorset Healthcare. Okay.
Yeah, so this involved a woman who had schizophrenia
Okay.
and tragically, during a psychotic episode,
Mm-hmm.
she killed her mother. And so she sued the healthcare authority,
Oh,
saying that they had been negligent in her care
Mm-hmm.
and that negligence had contributed to her actions.
Ah. Okay. So again, we've got that link between someone else's negligence
Yeah.
and the crime.
Exactly.
So what did the court decide?
So the Supreme Court, which is now the highest court in the UK,
Right.
they upheld the illegality defense.
They did.
Yeah. They said, look, we're not condoning what the defendant did,
Right.
but we can't allow her to profit from her crime.
Right.
And so they really emphasize this public policy element.
Okay.
It's about deterring wrongdoing,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that, public money,
Right.
which funds the NHS,
Right.
is used fairly.
Right. So it's not just a simple, you broke the law, so you can't sue.
No, absolutely not.
There's a lot more to it.
It's a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do courts actually decide when this defense applies?
Right. So there's this case, Patel v. Misra,
Yep.
and that kind of set out some guidelines for the courts to follow.
Okay.
And it's all about looking at the underlying purpose of the law that was broken,
Yeah.
any wider policy considerations,
Mm-hmm.
and whether it would actually be proportionate
Right.
to deny the claim.
So they're really weighing
They are, yeah.
all the...
It's not a black and white decision.
No, not at all.
It's about achieving that balance that we keep talking about
Right.
between, individual responsibility.
Right.
And holding people accountable for their negligence.
Okay, let's test my understanding.
Okay, go on.
Let's say I'm in a hospital
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to steal some medical supplies.
Okay.
But while I'm doing that, a doctor is negligent
Right.
and I get injured.
Okay.
Can I sue the hospital?
That is a fantastic example.
Is it?
It is.
Okay.
So what do you think?
I think based on what we've been talking about, I was committing a crime.
You were?
So I probably can't.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yes, sir.
I think you're absolutely right. The court would probably say no to that.
Okay.
You can't be stealing medical supplies
And then expect
to be compensated
to be protected.
for an injury you suffered while you were doing that.
Its cases are making me think differently
You did it.
about how the law works.
That's what we want.
Yeah, it's not always about who's right or wrong.
No, it's not. It's about balancing
These bigger picture ideas.
all these different factors. Yeah.
And principles.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any other cases that kind of illustrate this idea?
So there's one that's really interesting. It involves someone trying to escape from the police.
Okay.
So this particular individual, he was known for trying to flee
Okay.
from police custody.
Mm-hmm.
And he would repeatedly jump out of a window
What?
to try and get away.
Jump out of a window. Oh, my gosh.
And he actually injured himself quite badly each time.
Oh, no.
And guess what? He sued the police.
He sued the police for jumping out the window.
Yeah, basically
Oh, my
saying
God.
that it was their fault he got injured.
Well, what was his argument?
So he said that the police, knowing that he had this tendency,
Right.
he's trying to escape,
Escape.
they had a duty of care to stop him from harming himself.
So they should have taken precautions to stop him from jumping out a window.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't wait to hear what happened.
So this case is called Volenti v. Chief Constable.
Vilino.
Volenti.
Okay.
It caused quite a stir in the legal world.
I bet.
A lot of people were like, hang on a minute.
Yeah, he jumped out of a window.
Yeah.
Multiple times.
Yeah. It raises all sorts of questions about personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Where does the duty of care begin and end?
Right.
So it's a real head scratcher.
Okay, so what did the court decide?
So the Court of Appeal,
Okay.
they actually sided with the police.
Oh, they did.
They did. They said, look, escaping lawful arrest is a serious offense. And if we allow someone to sue
Yeah.
for injuries that they sustained while they were doing that,
While they were trying to get away.
it would undermine the whole legal system.
It would be like rewarding them.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
breaking the law.
So they were very clear in saying that, the police might have foreseen
Right.
that he might try to escape.
Okay.
But that didn't mean that they had a legal duty
Yeah.
to prevent him from harming himself.
Especially while committing a crime.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's about drawing that line
Right.
between what's reasonable
Yeah.
and what's just going too far.
Okay. I can see how people could see both sides of that.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, obviously, we want to hold people accountable for their actions.
Yeah.
But he did injure himself.
He did.
Multiple times.
He did. It's a real dilemma, isn't it?
It is. It's an ethical and legal gray area.
The gray area, yeah.
Well, I think we've explored 3 really fascinating defenses. Contributory negligence, volenti, and illegality.
The illegality.
And they all completely change how a negligence case...
They can work out. They can completely change the outcome.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm exhausted.
It's a lot to take in.
I know.
Tort law is a big area.
It is.
There's so much to learn.
There is. But I feel, I don't know, kind of energized
Oh,
to
good.
learn more.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's what we like to hear
What surprised you the most?
about these defenses.
Yeah.
I think for me, what's really fascinating is how they highlight
Yeah.
the fact that the law is constantly evolving.
Right.
It's not static.
It's not just like in a textbook somewhere and that's it.
It's living. It's breathing.
Yeah.
It has to adapt
Yeah.
to new situations.
Yeah.
Technology,
Technology.
societal values, all of that.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So it's really important to kind of engage with these issues.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Keep learning.
Because it affects us
Isn't that
every
different?
day.
Yeah.
Okay.
We all need to be a bit more legally minded,
We do.
I think.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Already.
I know, it flew by,
It did.
but we hope you found it fascinating.
And thought-provoking.
As we did.
Yeah. I hope it sparked some
Yeah.
interesting thoughts and conversations.
Keep exploring.
Indeed.
Keep those legal minds.
Questioning. All right, so we're back, and I'm still thinking about that guy who kept jumping out of the window.
It is a memorable case, isn't it?
It is
Foligno v. Chief Constable.
Foligno v. Chief Constable. Okay.
Yeah, so just to recap, he argued that the police should stop him from jumping.
Right, because they knew he had a history of it.
Exactly.
Okay, and so what did the court say to that?
Well, the Court of Appeal,
Okay.
they said no.
They said no.
You can't sue the police for injuries you get while trying to escape from them.
Right.
They said it would be totally against public policy. Yeah, it would undermine the whole system.
Exactly. You can't just break the law and then expect the law to protect you.
Right. You can't have it both ways.
Exactly.
But, I mean, on the other hand, he did get hurt.
Yeah, he did. Quite badly.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
It is a tough one. I mean, where do you draw the line?
Right. Where does personal responsibility end and the duty of care begin?
Exactly.
I mean, we want to hold people accountable for their actions.
Of course.
But we also want to protect people from harm.
Absolutely.
And this case really highlights how tricky that can be.
It does. And that's what's so fascinating about tort law, isn't it?
It is. It's not black and white.
No, not at all.
It's about navigating all these
gray areas.
gray areas, yeah.
Trying to balance these competing interests.
Right.
And ultimately, coming to a decision that's fair.
That's just...
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've learned a lot today.
I hope so.
We've talked about contributory negligence, Volenti,
Yeah.
and illegality.
3 big defenses.
And they all show how complicated negligence cases can be.
They do. Yeah.
What really stood out to you from all of this?
I think for me, it's how these defenses highlight that tension
Okay.
between individual responsibility and holding others accountable.
Right, like where do we draw the line?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not always easy to find that balance.
No, it's not. But I think that's what makes tort law so interesting.
It does, yeah. It's always evolving.
Right, always adapting.
And it really forces us to think about
Yeah.
what kind of society we want to live in.
What values are important to us.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Wow, time flies when you're talking about tort law.
It really does.
But hopefully our listeners are now armed with some new legal knowledge.
Yeah, and they're out there.
Ready to tackle those negligence cases.
Thinking about those gray areas.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's it for today.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.